China gathers dictators and authoritarian allies at the SCO summit. The meeting of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization is taking place in Tianjin. The main figures are Xi Jinping, Putin, Modi and Erdoğan. Officially, it is a multilateral gathering, but in reality, it has turned into demonstration of an anti-Western and anti-Ukrainian alliance. Putin once again tried to shift the blame for the war of Russia launched against Ukraine. He repeated the lie that NATO enlargement was the cause of the conflict and called the 2014 events in Kyiv a coup supported by the West. These are the same old false narratives, an attempt to justify the war and absolve the Kremlin of responsibility. Xi Jinping spoke of a world without bullying and condemned Cold War mentality. In fact, China is shielding Russia, calling for multipolarity. In other words, a world where dictators set the rules. He also promoted the idea of creating an SCO development bank to strengthen the bloc economically. And Modi put his emphasis on counterterrorism, but the key point is different. He openly supported Russia despite Western pressure. India continues to buy Russian oil, thereby financing Moscow's war in Ukraine. Turkey's president also attended the event. He tried to position himself as a mediator in the war, offering so-called peace efforts. But in the context of a gathering of dictators and authoritarian allies, his rhetoric looks more like an attempt to join a club that overall plays against Ukraine and the West. So in China, we see a meeting of dictators, each in their own way, but all united against freedom, against democracy, and above all against Ukraine. The summit showed that Russia is not isolated among dictators and autocrats. Instead, the world faces a bloc that wants to dictate its rules by force. Europe is drawing up detailed plans for a multinational troop deployment to Ukraine, but only after the war ends. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said that these would be pretty precise plans, involving potentially tens of thousands of European troops. They would be part of a new security guarantees for Kyiv. Crucially, the troops would not be alone. Ursula von der Leyen said US President Donald Trump had repeatedly confirmed that America will back the mission. The United States would provide command and control systems, intelligence and surveillance assets. The arrangement was agreed during a high-level meeting in Washington last month between Trump, President Volodymyr Zelensky and senior European leaders. The aim is to ensure that Ukraine, once the fighting ends, is not left vulnerable to another Russian attack. Officials stress this would not be NATO combat forces entering the current war, but a European-led multinational presence with American support to secure peace and stability afterwards. For Ukraine, it would be the first time foreign troops are formally stationed in the country as part of international guarantees. For Europe, it marks a shift, a readiness to take the lead in Ukraine's security while relying on the US as a backstop. Europe must stop giving into Russia's. That's what Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk said during his visit to the Polish-Belarusian border with the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. He stressed that recent weeks of Russia's war in Ukraine have shown one clear lesson: no compromise, no clever game with Putin and aggressive Russia will bring security. Tusk said Poland, Europe, NATO and the US must be strong, decisive and act in solidarity. He announced that Poland will invest about 47 billion euros in defense next year and called for major EU funding to secure the eastern border. Kremlin steps up information campaign to undermine Europe's role in peace talks. According to the Institute for the Study of War, Moscow has intensified its propaganda efforts to disrupt Western support for Ukraine and cast doubt on Europe's involvement in peace negotiations. The think tank notes that the Kremlin is pushing narratives that blame European governments for prolonging the war, threaten nuclear strikes against the West, and portray Russia's victory in Ukraine as inevitable. In recent days, Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov and Russian investment chief Kirill Dmitriev claimed that Europe wants to continue the conflict. Institute of Study War says this is a deliberate attempt to weaken American trust in European partners. The rhetoric escalated on August 31st when former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev lashed out at French President Emmanuel Macron and German Chancellor Friedrich Merz. He warned that they had forgotten the lessons of the World War II, adding that they could be identified by their teeth, a thinly veiled nuclear threat. Institute of Study War concludes that such statements, together with exaggerated claims of Russian progress on the battlefield, are part of a Kremlin strategy to project inevitability and pressure the West into concessions. At the same time, Ukrainian officials insist Europe must hold firm. Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha said Vladimir Putin has to realize the war threatens not only Ukraine but his own regime. Either he stops now or he faces serious consequences. This is the strategy of peace through strength. Military drills begin in Belarus, including nuclear weapons training. Troops from Belarus, Russia, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan have started CSTO exercises, codenamed Interaction 2025, Surge 2025. More than 2,000 soldiers are taking part, along with 450 units of equipment, including aircraft, helicopters and drones, according to the journalist. A striking element of the exercises is the planning of nuclear weapons use. Belarus Deputy Defense Minister said you cannot actually use something that threatens the whole world, but how to plan it we will learn. Minsk say that the maneuvers were moved deeper into Belarus to avoid accusations of provocation. But Ukrainian officials know that such exercises are part of a pattern. Russia and Belarus constantly use nuclear rhetoric and military drills to intimidate neighbors and the West. These exercises are separate from the much larger Zapad 2025 drills due to take place from 12 to 16 September. Analysts warn both sets of maneuvers are meant to remind Europe that Moscow and Minsk are ready to escalate a form of ongoing nuclear and military blackmail. That's all for now. For more content about Ukraine, please subscribe.